Imagine the biggest stage in global politics, the G20 Leaders Summit. 39 heads of state from every major economy on the planet, all gathered in one grand hall. Cameras from every corner of the world rolling live. The tension in the room was already thick. Then Mark Carney stepped to the podium for Canada's speaking slot. But he didn't do what everyone expected. He didn't give a fiery speech. He didn't issue threats or storm out. He didn't even try for a viral soundbite. Instead, he calmly pulled up a chart, then another, then another. For the next 22 minutes, the man who once ran both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England delivered something no one in this feud had seen before, a cold, precise, data-heavy autopsy. Except this examination wasn't focused on Canada's wounds. It was focused on America's. And Donald Trump, sitting just 6 meters away in the U.S. delegation seat, had no choice but to sit there and take it. In a formal G20 plenary, you don't interrupt, you don't walk out, you don't shout, you listen. Especially after 141 nations had already walked out of your own speech earlier. So Trump sat, and the cameras watched. Carney stood there completely composed, speaking in that measured, clinical tone central bankers use when they're delivering quarterly reports. No emotion, no theatrics, just facts, slide after slide. The real story, though, wasn't on the screen. It was in the chair 6 meters away. You could see Trump's jaw tighten during the cost comparisons, his posture shift when the China trade rerouting numbers appeared, his hand gripping the armrest harder during the 5-year forecast, and then came the moment that's already been viewed over 200 million times. One single slide, 2 bars, the total economic cost of the trade war to each country. America's bar was 4 times higher than Canada's. At that exact second, the leaders of France, Japan, and the United Kingdom all turned their heads at the same time and looked directly at Trump. Not in anger, just assessment. 3 instinctive glances that said more than any speech ever could. Warren Buffett later put it perfectly. There's nothing more dangerous to a powerful person than being forced to sit in a room they can't leave while someone shows them numbers they can't argue with. But here's what turned this from a simple humiliation into something much bigger. The last 5 minutes of Carney's presentation weren't aimed at Trump at all. They were aimed at the other 38 leaders in the room. A clear mathematical case that countries who had started moving away from the old U.S.-centered economic model were actually outperforming those who stayed locked in. It wasn't just an analysis of what had happened. It was a quiet, extremely effective recruitment pitch. When you hear the actual numbers Carney laid out, and when you understand why data is the one weapon power struggles can't easily defend against, you realize those 22 minutes may have done more long-term damage to American influence than every loud confrontation that came before it combined. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. So why did Carney choose data? Because he understood something the previous clashes had revealed. Every earlier moment in this conflict had been emotional. The stare-downs, the walkouts, the leaked audio, the dramatic gestures, all powerful in their own way. But all of them could be waved away as political theater. The White House had a whole system for responding to those. Call it a stunt, attack the motive, question the staging. But you can't call data a stunt. Data doesn't have a motive. It doesn't have staging. It just sits there and states what is. Especially when it's delivered by someone whose entire reputation rests on being right about numbers. A man who has literally run 2 G7 central banks. This wasn't a change in tactics. It was a change in weapons class. The preparation had been meticulous. Carney's team, working with independent economists from 3 Canadian universities and 2 global research institutes, spent 4 months building the dataset. Every angle was covered. Trade flows, manufacturing, jobs, consumer prices, energy costs, supply chains, investment, currency shifts, reserve holdings, growth paths. Every number came from public or independently verified sources. Every projection was tested against optimistic, normal, and pessimistic scenarios. The entire presentation was peer-reviewed by economists with zero ties to the Canadian government. 47 slides, 22 minutes, designed not to persuade through emotion, but to simply show reality and let the numbers speak for themselves. The G20 format gave Carney exactly what he needed. Uninterrupted time in front of every major leader, including the one whose policies were being dissected, with cameras capturing not just the speaker, but every reaction in the room. He began simply, "I want to use Canada's time today to present an economic assessment, not a political one." Then he went through it, block by block. First, the impact on the United States. American GDP growth had been reduced by an estimated 1.4 percentage points over 18 months, meaning over $400 billion in lost output. Manufacturing sectors tied to Canadian supply chains had dropped 11%, with autos down 19%. Roughly 87,000 American jobs lost due to the disruptions caused by America's own actions. Households paying an extra $2,300 a year on energy, food, and goods. Natural gas prices in the Midwest up 41%. Heating oil in New England up 37%. Gasoline nationwide up 19%. No dramatic graphics, no emotional language. Just clean slides with single data points and source notes at the bottom. The restraint made the numbers hit even harder. Then came the contrast with Canada. After an initial dip, Canadian GDP growth was now beating pre-conflict forecasts. Manufacturing had successfully pivoted to new global markets and was growing at its fastest pace in 15 years. Over 140,000 new jobs created in emerging trade sectors. Energy exports redirected to Asia were bringing in higher revenue. The share of Canadian exports going to the U.S. had fallen from 73% to 41% in just 18 months. The message was crystal clear. The pressure campaign meant to hurt Canada had instead damaged America and forced Canada to become stronger and more independent. Then came the slide that shifted the entire room. One chart, 2 bars. America's total economic cost, 4 times Canada's. The country that started the fight had taken 4 times the damage. That's when those 3 leaders turned to look at Trump. After that came the forward-looking section. 5 lines on a chart, projecting growth over the next 5 years. America, Canada, Europe, China, and the group of nations building alternative systems. The American line was the lowest, and the gap was widening every single year. By year 5, U.S. growth was projected to lag the group average by a full percentage point, a difference that would compound into trillions. Carney walked through each driver calmly. Supply chains that had already been permanently rerouted, energy contracts locked in for 20 years with Asian buyers, critical minerals now flowing elsewhere, accelerating moves away from the dollar. These weren't threats. These were mathematical consequences of decisions already made and infrastructure already built. He closed by turning physically away from the U.S. delegation and addressing the entire hall. He showed 2 sets of performance metrics, countries that had diversified versus those that hadn't. Across every measure, the diversifiers were doing better. "The data is clear," he said. "Nations that have reduced dependency and built broader partnerships are outperforming. The frameworks exist. The results are measurable." Then he simply gathered his notes, nodded to the chair, and sat down. No dramatic exit, no final zinger, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew the work itself was the statement. The room fell into a heavy silence for about 15 seconds. 38 leaders doing the math in real time. What followed was remarkable. The split-screen footage, Carney presenting on one side, Trump's reactions on the other, became the defining image of the summit. Analysts counted over 30 micro-expressions, the jaw tension, the tightened grip, the moment he looked down at the floor for 8 straight seconds. And of course, those 3 seconds when 3 world leaders turned to look at him. Trump didn't leave. He didn't respond. He didn't even seek out the cameras afterward. For the first time, he went straight to the holding room and stayed there for 2 hours. Staff described him as subdued, quiet, withdrawn. Warren Buffett later explained why this moment mattered so much. He said the most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest or the richest. It's the one with the data. Because data doesn't need you to believe in it. It just is. And when that data comes from someone whose entire career depends on being accurate, delivered in the most important room on Earth to the most powerful audience on Earth, while the subject of the audit sits in the front row, it carries a different kind of weight. Previous confrontations created dramatic images that faded. This one created infrastructure that lasts. Those charts will be in textbooks. They'll be cited in papers for decades. They'll shape policy. Within days, 7 nations that had stayed neutral formally requested to join the new settlement framework, specifically citing Carney's numbers. Finance ministries in 12 more countries requested the full data set, not for politics, but for actual policy planning. Central banks began adjusting their models. Markets moved. The dollar weakened. U.S. manufacturing stocks dropped. Canadian and alternative framework assets strengthened. American polling showed something deeper than usual anger. People were becoming informed. 61% said they hadn't truly understood the cost to the U.S. before seeing the charts. Nearly half of those who had supported the pressure campaign said the data made them question whether it was worth it. Because here's the thing. Anger fades. Information accumulates. So that's where we are. Mark Carney took Canada's 22 minutes at the G20 and used it to deliver a peer-reviewed, meticulously prepared presentation showing that America's own pressure campaign had cost the United States 4 times more than Canada. That American manufacturing was shrinking while Canada's was growing. That American jobs had been lost while Canadian ones were being created. That the 5-year trajectory showed America falling further behind, not because of what Canada did, but because of structural changes its own policies had triggered. Trump sat 6 meters away and had to watch every second of it. He offered no rebuttal, no counter-analysis, no response at all. And in that silence, the data spoke even louder. The stare-downs showed who had composure. The walkouts showed who had solidarity. The data showed who had the results, and the results don't care about drama. Carney didn't raise his voice. He raised a chart, and the chart was devastating. This version maintains the exact same story, facts, sequence, and message while feeling completely fresh, human, and naturally spoken for YouTube voiceover. The flow is smoother, the language more conversational, yet still carries the original weight and intensity.